Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start off by wishing everyone a happy Juneteenth, and thank you for attending Improving's June 19th virtual Lunch and Learn. Before we start, I want to inform you about a feature in the presentation that'll make this session more interactive. Please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows you to send the moderator, me, Shervin Joseph, questions to be delivered to our insightful presenter at the appropriate time. Now, speaking of insightful presenters, I am proud to present Blake McMillan, who's a professional Scrum trainer through scrum.org and a principal consultant at Improving with a focus on Agile coaching. Today, Blake will be sharing a lunch and learn titled Exploring Scrum Team Performance. The floor is all yours, Blake.
All right, thanks, Shervin. So I'm so excited that we're doing this together. This is something I've been looking forward to, and something funny is I've been refactoring this right up until, I don't know, 15 minutes ago. So as I've had some ideas, because you review things and make sure that okay, I want to make sure this is going to be really awesome. So I've been making changes. So if you've ever been to the workshop before, you're actually going to see new content today. So first off, what I want to do is just let people know about Improving. That's where I work. That's where Shervin works. We are super proud of this company and we think it's awesome. And guess what? Welcome, iTexaco, to the Improving family. I'm one of the first people that get to do that publicly. That news was just released yesterday, and I'm super excited to have them join us. The section of Improving that I work with is in the training department, like Shervin said. I actually started with Improving in April of 2019. And I have been working with them as a coach. And then I became a professional Scrum trainer at the end of 2019. And that's when I moved into the training organization. And that's where I work now. And so what I do is I do professional Scrum training for Scrum Master, Product Owner, also professional Scrum Foundations. And I'm looking to add in the professional Scrum with Kanban and also scaled professional Scrum at some point. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about how Scrum, what metrics do we normally use? What makes them useful? We're also going to discover some indicators for Scrum team performance that we're going to see where we can get that actually just using Scrum, which I think is pretty cool. And then the last thing is I'm going to ask you to try to decide how you're going to use this at work. So before I even get started with all that stuff, why should we even use Scrum? So one of the first things is just to deal with the complexity of product delivery. Doing product delivery is complex work. There's more unknowns than there are knowns. That's one of the reasons that people want to use Scrum. And the way that we address it is that we're constantly getting feedback. That is one of the things that I think Scrum is so great at doing is getting feedback from our customers. And so everything that we do in Scrum, we don't know for sure if it's going to be valuable, right? Now we always strive to, deliver something of the highest value to our customers frequently, but we don't know if it's going to be valuable until we give it to them. And so that's what we do is we constantly get that feedback. And then also Scrum's important for responding quickly to changes in business conditions. Is that a thing? Is that something that we should have to worry about? Yes. And we have a live example. We have a live example that we're living out right now. So here's the thing I think about. So when people were doing their planning back in 2019, okay, what are we going to do for 2020? What should we do? Let's say that you were in a retail business. I bet you no one was thinking, you know what's really important? Providing curbside service pickup for our store. Nobody was thinking about that. But guess what? All of a sudden, everybody had to figure that out because they said, hey, we can't have people gathering in here. So being able to respond quickly to changes in business conditions, that's a big thing. That's a big deal. One of the phrases I like to say is with Scrum, we're going to try to work on the right thing at the right time all the time. And the way that we do that is because we have a product owner. We have someone whose focus is making sure that we're always trying to maximize the value of what we're doing. So what is the primary measure of performance? So I'm just going to pick two things straight out of the Scrum Guide. And one is about that Scrum teams are supposed to deliver a working increment that meets our definition of done every single sprint. Matter of fact, it says in the Scrum Guide that the whole purpose of a sprint is to produce that done increment. Matter of fact, here's what I'll say, that the reason that companies put up with Scrum is because we produce results with Scrum. One of the things that you'll hear me say in classes, and it's so funny because not only do I say this in classes, but also when I'm doing coaching, I say this, is Scrum doesn't solve your problems. And then before I finish it, everyone who knows me just did this. I know. It exposes them, because I would say it so often that I would get this call and response thing where I'd say, Scrum doesn't solve your problems. And they'd be like, we know. It exposes them. That exposing of problems, it's painful. Like organizations struggle, and like they like start sometimes kind of even hating on Scrum because it unearths all these things that need to change that aren't conducive to delivering value. And that's a painful thing. The reason that they put up with that pain, though, is because we deliver an increment. We deliver something that is useful, hopefully, to customers. Now, I'm also going to point us to the fact that in the Agile Manifesto, of the 12 Agile principles, 3 of them talk about delivering value. So delivering value, super important, and that is the ultimate measure of whether a Scrum team is successful. But I think there's other stuff that we can kind of get to that is besides these ultimate measures, which are done. So first, I want to just talk about like what are some of the common tools that are used. And so many of you probably look at that and say, oh yeah, I've seen that in Jira or Azure DevOps or whatever it is that you use. It's velocity charts and burndown charts. Those are common tools used. And so what I want to do is I want us to look at the velocity chart, and let's talk about how is it useful and how is it not useful. So first of all, I think velocity charts can completely be useful. I think the people that they're most useful to is the product owner. And the reason why is the product owner can look at data and see, okay, what is this development team, what is this Scrum team capable of producing, right? How, like, what can they turn into an increment that's done, like, and get some data points. They can use that to actually kind of forecast. They look at their product backlog and they can make a forecast of like, okay, this is when I think this will be done based on this data. I think this can also be useful for the development team in sprint planning. Now, I say it can be useful because in sprint planning, it can be a start for them to do sprint planning, right? So if you have a team that's stable and there's not some, huge bunch of vacations that are getting ready to happen, they can look back in their past and say, look, we've done, 20, 25 points over the last 3 months. Let's kind of take that as our starting place for sprint planning. So this chart can be useful for doing that. How is it not useful? Because there's definitely anti-patterns and bad things that happen with velocity charts. One is when someone outside the team uses it to criticize the team. You guys were doing 25 points before. What's the deal, right? And see, like, let's look at the example on there, Sprint 13. If people come to to the Scrum team and say, hey, you guys, I don't know what's going on, but Sprint 13 is a mess. You better fix it. That is terrible. I never want velocity charts to be used to beat up the team. Now, as we look at Sprint 13, I'm also reminded the velocity chart can be useful for a Scrum Master too. And the reason why is one thing that I've seen in my experience is a lot of times development teams, they're so focused and they so want to deliver that they will overcommit habitually. They will constantly forecast more than they can do. And so whenever I see that pattern, that's something I'll bring up in a retrospective because I want to find out, are you doing this just because you're so psyched and so excited about the work that we're doing that you just want to do more and more? And because that's not a bad thing. But if you're forecasting more than you can actually get done consistently, is it because someone outside of the team is badgering you to do more stuff? Because if so, that stinks. I don't want that to happen. So that's why I think it can be useful. But yeah, anytime this is used outside of the team to inflict harm on the team, it's terrible. I don't like it. Okay, so now let's look at burndown charts. Burndown charts, another thing that, you know what, I think this can be useful. This can be useful for the team. And the people that I look to really find this useful is the development team. And the reason why is this is a visualization of the progress of the sprint. And what I like to see development teams do, though I don't mandate it or say you must as a Scrum Master, is if your burn down chart is updated before the daily Scrum, this can be a useful tool, right? Because let's say let's look on here together and see you can see September 4th, 5th, and 6th. We didn't really see a drop down. If that continued further, then that might be something where the development team knows, hey, you know what? We should probably have a conversation with the product owner. Things are not going the way that we expected, and we really do owe them a conversation if we think that we're going to miss out on our sprint goal, or if we need to adapt or change something. So it's good for them. How is it not useful? Again, it's not useful if people say, hey, your burn down chart doesn't look right. Wrong. Anytime that happens, then the development team says, okay, how do you want it to look? And then they're going to start changing that, which stinks. It stops being useful, stops being relevant. So those are two kind of traditional tools that we use. And the reason that we use tools is, and we use metrics, is because what we want to do is we want to inspect and adapt, right? What we want to do is we want to have metrics be useful for guiding us on where we want to spend time, where we want to improve, where we want to do something different. And so that's why I think it's really important for the metrics to never be used against the team, because then it's going to make them want to be less transparent. And really what we want is we want metrics to not be tied to performance goals or anything like that, because we just want it to be a guide for where should we make changes. Now, when I mention inspection and adaptation, I always think, okay, well, guess what? In Scrum, we actually have specific events that we use to do inspection and adaptation. And are there places in these events, are there metrics that we could collect that would help us grow and get better as a Scrum team? I think there are. And that is what we're actually going to spend the bulk of our time talking about. Now, before we get started, let me just tell you something. This is for Scrum teams, to be used by Scrum teams. If you came to this Lunch and Learn today and you're like, oh boy, I can't wait to find out how I can find out how to put the screws to the Scrum teams, leave. Seriously, leave right now. Shervin, if anybody raises their hand saying they're doing that, kick them out right now. We do not want that, right? What we want is we want to use these metrics for the Scrum team to get better. We want them to get better by themselves, right? We want Scrum teams to be self-organizing. We want them to say, we want to continuously improve and we want to learn different ways to do that. We don't want that forced on us from the outside. So that also reminded me, if you have questions, and you shouldn't have any questions yet because I haven't done the really new or interesting stuff. I've just kind of talked about some of the stuff we've already talked about. But if you have questions, please put those in the Q&A panel, and Shervin's going to ask me some questions at the end. And he's going to ask the questions that you come up with. And I believe there's also a way for you to vote on people's questions. And so if someone asks your question that you were thinking of, just vote for that one. That way Shervin will see, oh, here's this one that everybody's all super excited about. So anyway, with all that aside, I am now going to continue because we have done the warning and we're never going to use these against the Scrum team. Okay, first up, the sprint. So before I even talk about the measurements, what I want to talk about is like, what is the purpose of the sprint? The purpose of the sprint is for us to get feedback on a regular basis, and it also helps us limit our risk. It says that the sprint is the heartbeat of Scrum. So one of the metrics that I've used that I thought was really insightful was just a simple chart that was, how was work today? And so I would have the team members listed for the team, and then just the days of the sprint. How was work today? And I would have just, it's binary. It's happy face, or sad face? Happy face or sad face? And of course, I'd always get asked, well, can I just do the no face? And I'm like, well, I want to know if are you enjoying your work, or did work kind of suck today? Because if it did, like, I want to have a conversation. And again, this is not so that we can say, hey, I'm going to report you to the, person who is responsible for making sure that everybody's happy and puts on a happy face. I don't want that. Matter of fact, one of the things that I've seen when I've used this with a team is when you see people that when you're interacting with them, they're always like, ugh, and like they just seem like they've got this really just beat down kind of look. And then I look at the chart and their chart says all happy face. I'm like, why are they saying all happy face if they're not happy? And that's a conversation about transparency. Do you feel like it's safe? Do you feel like this is a safe place where you could say I'm not happy? If not, I look at that as an impediment as a Scrum Master. I've also seen interesting patterns where with teammates, like one teammate is happy, then the other's sad, and then I'll see it flipped. And that's an interesting thing to go into. Well, hey, I saw this flip happen. What happened? Oh, this is when I completed my code. And, I knew that Tim was going to start doing some testing. And then Tim's like, yeah. And then I start going through your code and it's a mess. And there's all this craziness that we have to deal with. And there's all these defects. And then once all those defects get brought to the developer's attention, then they're like, then they're sad face, like, this is how it's supposed to work. It worked on my machine. Okay, so that is how was work today. The other thing is cumulative overtime for the sprint. So I think that's important to track because what we want is we want for the team to be able to work at a sustainable pace. If you see that overtime is always happening and it's constant, I'm going to ask why. Because the development team, you're the ones that are selecting what work you feel like you can get done within the sprint. Select less next time. Don't kill yourself all the time. We want this to be an enjoyable experience. And if you're working overtime all the time, you're going to get burnt out. If you get burnt out, you're probably going to bail. And that's no good. Attrition's terrible, right? So I think this is a good measure as well. The other one is changes to our current sprint. Are we getting product backlog items added? That's what PBI stands for, by the way. Are we adding PBIs? Are we adding product backlog items after we started the sprint? Hey, you know what? This is the real world. Sometimes that happens. Emergencies come up, but is it happening all the time? If it's happening all the time, what's going on? Why can't we really focus in? This is supposed to be the most valuable stuff that we can work on. Why are we discovering new most valuable things all the time? That's a conversation that needs to happen. And then sometimes PBIs are getting removed after the sprint. That's fine. It's fine if the development team and the product owner are like, hey, you know what? Now that we look at this, we don't even need this next one because this one's gonna serve the purpose of why we had all these together. That's awesome. But if we're removing them because maybe we haven't done some really dug into what the actual result that we're after, maybe we need to spend some more time in our sprint planning kind of figuring that out. So that's the stuff for the sprint. Next up, sprint planning. All right, so there's kind of a common theme that you'll see is number of no-shows. So whenever I find out that there are Scrum team members that are not showing up, that's a cause of concern for me as a Scrum Master. That could be development team members. And here's an anti-pattern that I've seen. Most of the development team don't show up. Instead, a developer shows up to sprint planning, and maybe that developer has a title of dev lead, and they're like, yeah, I'll handle all the planning. We're going to do this, 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 and this. So is that a plan made by the development team for the development team that the whole development team buys into? And then if that plan goes wrong, what happens? Do all the other developers point to that person and say, shh, that's his plan, wasn't my plan, right? We don't want that. What we want is we want that full engagement of the team because we want to be able to get everyone engaged in this planning effort because they're going to own the plan, right? Next one, the sprint goal. Was a sprint goal created? Like, believe it or not, this is a thing that I see all the time. It's not there. It's not done. And the worst sprint goal is no sprint goal. So if we don't even have any type of cohesion to the work that we're doing, that's a problem. That's something that we want to dig into and we want to address. Now, I always say that no sprint goal is the worst sprint goal. Do you know what the second most terrible sprint goal is? Do all the stuff. But that's one that I see all the time. Complete PBIs 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm like, that's a sprint goal? That's not, I mean, technically it's better than nothing, but only by a little bit. Really what we want is we want a sprint goal to be something that points us to something that we want to change, a customer behavior that we want to change, or maybe some value we want to deliver to a customer. And when we do that, we're not really concerned just about completing a number of items. We're talking about achieving something, and that I feel like that makes the team members get more excited, and it also connects them to a purpose. Last one here, and another pattern we'll see is sometimes these last ones can be a bit controversial. So a useful sprint backlog created. One of the anti-patterns that I've seen in my coaching work is that sprint planning, which for a 1-month sprint is time boxed to 8 hours. I see sprint planning take 8 seconds. 8 seconds, Blake, you got to be crazy. Nope, I've seen it happen, and here's the way it looks. Well, hey, let's go ahead and pull up Jira. All right, we have a velocity of 25, so 5, 5, 5, 5. Okay, cool. Sprint planning's done and done. There's a sprint. Start the sprint. That's not sprint planning. That's not what sprint planning is really all about. What sprint planning is all about is let's get into the how are we going to do this. Let's start kind of deconstructing this thing, because if we do that right, then we're going to have it deconstructed so that we're going to be able to track the progress of how we're doing towards getting these product backlog items done throughout the sprint. And so this is something that I think that we can look at. Now, is there a specific metric like number of no-shows? No, there's not. But this one is definitely more qualitative than quantitative. But we should be able to see a sprint backlog that's going to make our progress during the sprint transparent. And so, again, that's a little bit of a qualitative statement, but that is something that I have found really helps teams in my experience. All right. So the next one we're going to talk about is the daily scrum. So the purpose of the daily scrum is for the development team to come up with their plan for the next 24 hours. It is not a status meeting. So that's one of the first things we have to talk about with the daily scrum. And then here's the other thing too, Scrum Masters, be careful, because guess what? This is not your meeting to facilitate. So this is not one where you're gonna go into the daily scrum. Oh, whoa, hold on everybody. I just came from this really cool lunch and learn, and I'm going to change the way that we're doing the daily scrum. Nah, let's not do that. That's not what we're looking for. Now, is it possible you may bring up some of this stuff in a retrospective? Yeah, sure. Okay, so going back to our popular first one, number of no-shows. If we have people not showing up for the daily scrum, then that means they're not getting involved with the planning. That's not good. And in fact, that's a bad thing, because the whole team should be working collaboratively towards the sprint goal, and it should require all of them. Number of late arrivals. For me, this is something that kind of touches on respect. If people are just showing up late, then they're not really being respectful to their team. I'm going to go back real quick. On the number of no-shows, here's an anti-pattern that I've seen is they don't show up, but they send their updates through email. Here's my updates. This isn't a status update meeting. That's not what it's about. It's about coming up with our plan. And the most important part of the plan is, here's what I'm going to try to get done today, right? Now we move into the slightly controversial one. And this is, I put the number of tasks that roll over, just so you know, no such thing in tasks in Scrum. Like, that's not a thing in Scrum, but it is a thing that we see as we apply Scrum. It's when people deconstruct their work, sometimes it's called tasks, right? So this, again, is not something that we want to use to beat someone down. Like, hey, Shervin, I noticed that you said you were going to get this thing done and you didn't. What's the deal? That's not cool. That's not what we're looking for, right? But what we do look at is, are people focused? right? Like, let's say you couldn't get something done that you thought was reasonable that you could get done, but you couldn't get it done because something else stole your focus. Something else, barged in and required you to, lose your focus and concentration on the most important stuff that we could think of. I think that's important. I think that's something important to call out. And then also the other deal too that I've seen is when someone comes to the daily Scrum and they say, "Oh yeah, this thing that I wanted to gun, it's blocked. So yeah, it's blocked. So that's an impediment." And then someone says, "Oh, when did you find out that this was a blocker and this was going to make it where you couldn't move forward?" Yesterday before lunch." Really? And now is when you're bringing it up? That's weird. You should be bringing that stuff up immediately. Don't wait to bring up an impediment at the daily Scrum. There's nothing that says you have to wait. Should we discuss impediments then? Sure. As a development team, should they talk about their impediments? Yeah, but don't wait. So anyway, that's what that one's about. Okay, now we're going to move on to the review. All right, again, this one's not the number of Scrum team members that don't show up. We do want them to show up, by the way. That's important. But here's what I put in is the number of customers/stakeholders invited versus attended. To me, I think this is a good measure of engagement. Now, I've actually served teams that had huge numbers of stakeholders for a single product. And we don't expect for every stakeholder to come to the sprint review, because if they don't have anything that's immediately coming up, maybe they think, since my thing's not coming up, I'm not really interested in making the time for it. Some of them do though, and I think that's cool. But if this increment that we're producing is the thing that you've asked for and you don't show up, that's weird. That's really weird. And here's the other thing. I'm going to immediately go into number 2 here, which is, are business results shared? Because the sprint review is not the demo. Matter of fact, that's one of the things that I don't like when I hear it, is when people call the sprint review the demo. It's not the demo. It's a collaborative working session. And so here's the deal. As a stakeholder, I'm not expecting you to come to a show and say, "Oh, nice, that's nice, I like that." No, I don't want that. What I want you to do is I want you to engage. I want you to be bringing insights. I want you to be telling the Scrum team, "Hey, remember that increment that you guys produced 2 sprints ago? You know how we thought it was going to reduce calls to the contact center? Great news, it did." And then the Scrum team says, "Awesome, we made a difference. We changed something with the business." So I really want stakeholders to be able to come in and share the results. Now, this next one is the purpose of the sprint review is for us to adjust, right? It's for us to make changes to what we're going to do. And so if we have a sprint review and there's no changes to the product backlog based on the sprint review, that's kind of weird, right? Because we should add new ideas as we see this increment, and as our stakeholders see the increment, they should be like, "Wow, you know what? This is really cool. You know what else we could do?" And as they're saying, "You know what else we could do?" someone should be taking down, like development team members, you should be taking down what they're saying. And then that's something that maybe we're going to talk about in our next refinement session. Also, there could be changes to the product backlog order. I expect that, right? As people get fired up about some new functionality, maybe they look at something coming up and says, now that I see this, I don't think we need that next thing. I think this is going to do it. I think this is what we were after, and we're getting the results that we were after. So in a sprint review, I look for the product backlog to change. All right, next up, our sprint retrospective. Okay, so with the sprint retrospective, again, we see the common theme, number of no-shows, right? The number of no-shows, if you're not coming to the sprint retrospective, something's going on. And here's the deal too. One of the things, and it's a weird thing that I hear this, is I will have people ask me, "Well, is it okay for the product owner to come to the sprint retrospective?" And I'm like, "Well, the product owner is part of the Scrum team, so yeah, I want the product owner to be at the sprint retrospective, because if they're not, we're missing out on a very important voice." And one of the ways we talk about the product owner is the voice of the customer. So if the voice of the customer's not showing up and sharing some of their insights, I think we lose out on a lot. I also think it's important for all of the development team members to show up as well. In a sprint retrospective, like what we're looking for is we're looking to continuously improve. That's the whole purpose of this event. And so we're going to be looking at people, processes, relationships, tools, and we're going to examine our definition of done. What would we think if there was a relationship problem, but the person that had a relationship problem didn't bother showing up to the sprint retrospective? That'd be weird, right? And so to me, if we have habitual no-shows, that's a conversation. That's something that we should get into. Improvement identified. Did we identify an improvement? So the sprint retrospective, one of the formats that we use is set the stage, gather data, and then I always say analyze the data, but it's actually generate insights, and then decide what to do, and then close the retrospective. If our retrospectives are not producing an actionable improvement, that's weird, because what are we using them for? And I've seen retrospectives that were kind of like not productive because it just kind of seemed like it was a griping session. And if a griping session doesn't lead to us wanting to change something, it's not super useful. The other thing I've seen is that the sprint retrospective doesn't lead to an improvement because everybody's trying to be so polite. It turns into this kudos session, right? Hey, kudos to so-and-so, kudos to so-and-so, kudos to so-and-so, and now the retrospective's over. That's not a good retrospective because we're looking to improve. Now, should we call out stuff like that? Heck yeah. Matter of fact, one of the formats I like to use is one called Starfish, and that's where we say, what should we continue doing, or what's something awesome that we're doing that we should do even more of, right? Like, so those elements, they're important, but that's not the only thing. We should be looking for, like, hey, what should we do less of, or what should we stop doing completely, or maybe there's something that we're not doing that we should start doing. So I think that's important. And so if that's not happening, I feel like we're really missing out on kind of like the big part of what we get out of the retrospective is something that we're going to put on our sprint backlog that we're going to improve. The other thing I have on there, and it's just one word, is trends. So I talk about this one because I have coached teams in the past that they were really super excited about making tools changes, right? Like there would be so much energy around tools changes, but then whenever we would start to get into some of the kind of icky, sticky business of relationships, because people were disrespectful, or people wouldn't listen to other people, or they would interrupt, and that stuff, it's not as comfortable to them. And when we got into that, all of a sudden, man, people just clammed up, and it felt like there was like low energy in the room. And so I noticed a trend that all of the improvements that were identified seemed to be the same thing over again: tools, right? But yet there were still some things that we needed to work on from a people standpoint, from a relationship standpoint. And so I look at those trends, and that's where, as a Scrum Master, I may just call out to the team, hey, I noticed that we've had some issues with respect, but we're not actually calling that out here. What's going on, right? And bring that to the team. The other thing too is one of the other things besides the people, the process, relationships, and tools is our definition of done. When was the last time we've kind of upped our game with our definition of done? Right, our definition of done, it's a product level statement of quality for for the product that comes from the development organization. But guess what? Each Scrum team is going to probably add some stuff to their own personal version of the definition of done, which doesn't mean they take away stuff from the actual definition of done, but they may add some stuff that's just for them. When was the last time that you did that? Because we should do that, because we should be looking to constantly increase the quality of the increments that we produce. Then the last one, and I'll tell you something funny. Well, I think it's funny. I actually came up with this today as I was reading through this deck, just to make sure I remembered the stuff that I was going to talk about. I was like, hey, you know what? This is something that I think would be a good addition here. And it's the idea of, if you had a close friend who had a skill set that the team needed, and there was like actually the opportunity to bring them on the team, would you recommend that they join the team? If yes, that's awesome, right? If no, why not? Right? Again, this is not to beat people down and say, hey, you need to be an advocate for this team, and if you're not, you're going to get in trouble. No, that's not what it's about. That's lame. But if there's something in you that says, shoo, I wouldn't have my friend join this team. Matter of fact, I'd tell him not to. Well, why don't we see if we can change that, right? And there could be things that are outside the control of the Scrum team that make it where you feel that way. Well, guess what? That's still an impediment. And a Scrum Master's job is not just to remove impediments and help resolve impediments that are at that team level. Scrum Masters are also called to help make changes at the organizational level. And so if there's stuff going on at the organizational level that makes it where this is not a good place to work. Matter of fact, we are miserable, and we would never, ever invite our friends into this horrid work environment. That's terrible. We should fix that. So that's what Team NPS is all about, is would you recommend joining this team to a close friend? The way that I would recommend that you do that is you would use a scale. Could be 1 to 5, and then you say 5, that's your promoter. 4, that's neutral. 3, maybe that's not even neutral. Maybe what that is, that's a detractor, because when I see 3, what I think is meh. And if your attitude is meh, I don't know, that's not a good thing, right? So that's how I would do that one. So what I've just done is I've shared some of the stuff that I've tried as a Scrum Master and I've done. And what I want to do is I want to ask you, and this is kind of the awkward part because I can't see any of you and I can't interact with any of you in a real-time way. But the thing is, so what now? Like, what are we going to do with this? You've gotten this information. What you can do is you can say, "Up, I got this information. I'm going to stick it on a shelf." And I attended a lunch and learn. Check. Well, I mean, okay, you could do that. Or am I going to get some of this stuff and actually put it to work? Because that's what I hope. And do you have to do all of these? Hey, you know what? I listened to this lunch and learn on Friday. I'm going to go institute all of these on Monday. No, probably not, because that's going to freak your team out for one. But could I try one? Could I try a couple? That's what I would suggest. Like, start trying to see, how could I use some of these? And maybe there's an event that right now the team kind of says, I don't even know why we come to this thing. This is lame. I don't like it. I feel like it's a waste of time to come here. Maybe that's where you start applying some of these to figure out, hey, how can we make this better? How can we get what we're trying to get out of this event? So that's my hope, is that you'll take some of these and that you'll actually use them. So that is me trying to be as right on time as I can with doing this thing. So now is when I want to open this up for questions, because I wanted to leave some space for questions. So Shervin, you're either going to say, Blake, there's no questions. We're done, baby. Mic drop, bam. Or you're going to say, hey, we got some questions.
We got no questions, Blake. No, I'm kidding. We got tons of really good ones. Like, these are some of the better ones that I've seen.
Awesome.
The first ones is like the bomb that people drop, and I want to hear the answer that you have. Right, there's a lot of related questions to the first one.
Okay.
Should metrics be shared with leadership?
Should metrics be shared with leadership? So here's the deal. I think we have to look at this as a trust thing, right? I think everything, see now, look, I'm going to go back on my slide because I'm going to look at these and say, are any of these super top secret? So let's look at that first one there. How was work today? if I shared this with leadership and then leadership came over and said, hey, I need to talk to you in my office right now. I see you put some sad faces 3 in a row. That's unacceptable. No, I'm not going to share. Nope. I'm not going to do that. It's not safe, right? If it's safe to share with your leaders, then you should. It's cool to be transparent about what's going on. But if your leaders are in a place where they need coaching themselves and they are kind of like at your team, then I don't know. Like that's going to be kind of something you're going to have to play. So here is the ultimate Scrum Master response. It depends. And so hopefully that's not going to be the answer to every single one of the questions. But for that one, it's going to depend. And here's the thing, though, is if you're sharing this with leadership and something kind of weird happens, like where they do something that's not cool to the team, well, guess what? That was something that needed to come out, right? Because that behavior, that's something that you should address as a Scrum Master. So to me, that opens up a coaching opportunity. So for most of them, I'd say, yeah, like we should be cool with sharing them with leadership. And then if leadership acts in a way that's not consistent with our Scrum values, great, let's have a Scrum values discussion. And the thing that I'm so used to doing in classes is, did that answer your question? But then I'm like, oh, I won't even know. So I hope that answered your question.
There's a very similar follow-up one. It's what metrics are useful for leadership? What do you recommend for if you wanted to communicate the transparency of the work the team's doing? What would you advise?
You know what? One of the things that I look to for leadership is making an environment that's good for the team, making sure that the team has all of the tools they need. So let's go back again because I can't remember the stuff. So if we look at some of these improvements or some of the things that we brought up in a retrospective, that stuff goes on the sprint backlog. If it's an improvement, it's going on the sprint backlog. So, some of that stuff is public. So if we're not getting the support that we need, gosh, I would definitely want to share that one with our leadership. If we start talking about the NPS of the team being low, if the leadership can understand there may be organizational things that need to change, then definitely we should share it. But if that turns into, well, you people better stop putting this negative score because my bonus is tied to that, that's lame. We don't want that. But I think the team NPS is a good one, because if there's stuff that's going on that's making the environment miserable and people don't want to work there, that's something that you should want to change as a leader. Let me look at another one real quick. Stuff here, and I'll actually tell you, I have actually seen a positive result of sharing the stakeholders and customers piece with leadership, because leadership reached out to other members of leadership across the organization and said, hey, I noticed that you didn't come to the review. What's going on? And they're like, oh, I didn't know it was important. And then they shared with them, well, actually, it's really important because you know what? We're looking to get your feedback. And so this is one that I think would be a good one. The business results, I want leaders to be engaged on that one for sure, because I want leaders to be all about trying to make sure that we're changing the business, like we're actually making a difference with the work that we do. So those are a couple of that I think are great. So the ones that I'd be a little bit like, I don't know, these are the ones that are in the definite I don't know category, right? Because the number of late arrivals, I think sometimes leadership thinks, hey, that's my job. I want to go tell them, hey, look, if you're late again, that's it. I'm going to write you up. That's not what I'm looking for out of this. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for the development team to be self-organized. And I want us to bring this up in the retrospective that, hey, something's going on. Because guess what? It might not be neglect. It might not be that this development team member is like someone that doesn't care about the team. It could just be, hey, I got to take my kids to school. And because of the time the daily scrum starts, I can never make it on time. Okay, no problem. Why don't we change when the daily scrum starts? And this is where I've had a team that had their daily scrum at 4 p.m. Yep, not 4 a.m. Whew, that'd be crazy. But 4 p.m. And they did it because their mornings were always crazy. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to make sure that this was consistent and that we had it at the same time all the time to reduce complexity, because that's why we do it. And so they actually changed their daily scrum. So that number of late arrivals, that is something where management and leadership may think, hey, this is where I can really dig in and make a difference. Nah, that's not what I'm looking for there. So I don't have a clear-cut answer of this one, not that one, not this one, not this one, because you know what? You may have some leadership folks that are really cool and they're just like, hey, you know what? I see these things going on. Let me find out if there's anything I can do for them. Maybe there's something I can do. If that's the way leadership's dealing with late arrivals, then heck yeah, share it with them. So I hope that answered your question.
The next question we have is, how would you define no-show? Are there excused no-shows that you wouldn't count in this metric?
So again, I want to make sure that this is not something where we're going to penalize people. No-show's a no-show. And so the example that I just gave is someone could have a no-show because their car broke down. Someone could have a no-show because they're sick and they couldn't make it. It's just data, right? Like that data doesn't mean you have 3 no-shows, you're a bad person. No, it just means, hey, I was out 3 days, so I didn't show up to the daily scrum, but I was out, right? But if it's a no-show just because like, yeah, I didn't show up because I sent my status update through email. That's interesting. Let's talk about that. So the no-shows isn't, and that's one of the things we have to be careful of whenever we talk about metrics, whenever we talk about like how we're gathering data. If that turns into something that we're going to penalize people for, or something that we're going to, write them up or go after them, that's not so good. And that's also going to mean that you'll see people starting to try to game those metrics. We don't want that. All we want is we want some data so that we can decide, hey, like the example I gave, if 3 people of a 6-person development team are habitually late and we find out it's because their parents, they're taking their kids to school, why don't we make the daily scrum at a different time? Or maybe you have some team members who work in a completely different time zone and you're being unreasonable because what you're asking them to do is wake up at 4 a.m. to be part of this. Is that a conversation that we can have? And maybe that's what the no-show is getting to. Hopefully that answers your question.
Like, this is an interesting one because it deals with just career growth and improving skills in Scrum.
Okay.
What is a good metric for performance for a developer/programmer focused on individual performance and career growth? This is the individual skill set, the developers.
Yeah. Okay. So this touches an area that's kind of controversial and it's going to be kind of weird. And the person that asked this is probably like, hey, that's not what I want you to talk about. But I'm really super concerned if I hear about individual performance. And the reason why is, oops, hold on one second. Let me make sure I didn't just, okay, cool. I thought I just hung up on the Teams call. That would have been bad. So one of the things that I get concerned about is if I hear about individual performance, because what I want the development team to be focused on is what do we do together? Because if you're focused on what I can do and what I'm doing for me, that can lead to some kind of unhealthy behaviors that make you more focused on what you're doing for you as opposed to what you're doing for the product and what you're doing for the team. So that's one of the things I wanted to address just first off with that. But then there's the positive side to what you're saying, which is like, what can I do to constantly grow, to constantly improve? One of the things that comes to mind for me is becoming more T-shaped. Now, this is a concept that people talk about, and what it means is like on a development team, there are usually multiple skills that are needed in multiple domains. So a lot of times when people come from a traditional project management world, they're very specialized, right? Like I do UI and that's it. Or I am an API developer and that's it. Or I only do database work and that's it. And so they're super focused on this. Now, being focused, that's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing for you to have really deep skill sets. But this T-shaped notion is that in addition to your super awesome skill set, you've also developed some other skills in some of the other areas. So for people that do coding, are they learning how to get better at doing test automation? And are they getting some skills and doing a little bit of the analysis piece that maybe someone from the business systems and analyst world could kind of help grow those skills? So that's one of the things is I see as a opportunity for individual development is, am I growing my skills horizontally? Also, am I growing my skills vertically? Am I getting better at my craft? Am I learning more so that I'm able to come to the team with new insights? There's multiple organizations that I've worked with that will have their developers, go to training, go to conferences, go learn stuff, and bring that back to the team. So that's the kind of stuff that I look to is, are you bringing new things to your team? Are you bringing new ideas? To me, that would be a really interesting metric, is like, number of new innovations that you've brought to the team. But again, I don't want that to be a thing where it's like, well, I've got 7 innovations and you got 3, you stink and I'm awesome. That's not a healthy thing. But being able to bring new ideas and new concepts and maybe even new technologies to your team, that's cool stuff.
Hey, Blake, we got about 8 minutes left, and I got 4 more questions I want to get to you. So hopefully we can get through all of them. If we miss your question, I apologize.
So let me just tell y'all what that was. So Blake, if you could have shorter answers and not super long-winded answers, that'd be great. Okay, Sherman, I'll try.
The audience can't see the big smile on my face. This is from Mark. Mark is asking, are there any tips for generating more involvement from your stakeholders during their sprint review?
Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to say is, are you working on stuff that the stakeholders care about? Because if you're not, that's a huge problem. There's a phrase that my friend Ty likes to say, and it's that product owners that don't listen to their developers will deliver a crap product. Product owners that do not listen to their stakeholders won't be stakeholders or won't be product owners long. So first thing is, make sure that what you're doing, somebody cares about. If you're doing stuff that people don't care about, that's why they're not showing up to your sprint review. The second thing is that I would suggest is making sure that it's interactive, because that's one of the things that I've seen in sprint reviews is that people just kind of show up and then they listen and then they leave. If they're not invited to engage, if they're not invited, like, hey, you just saw this, what do you think could be better about this? What do you like about this? Like, get them involved in the sprint review. That's me trying to be brief.
We have a follow-up. How would you encourage engagement in the retrospective if the team is quiet?
Yeah, I love that question. And here's a funny thing. I'm not sure if you guys could tell, but I'm an extrovert. And one of the things that that I've learned as an extrovert is that there's sometimes, not all the times, it's actually all the time, sometimes where when I'm in a group setting, I will just start talking because I'm excited about what we're talking about. And like, I got things to share. I got ideas. And here's the weird thing about extroverts. Sometimes the way I figure out what I'm going to say is I start talking, just like I did right now. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I started talking and it all worked out. Just kidding. No, one of the things that's really important is allowing that space. And so one of the things that I found super helpful is using silent collaboration techniques. And so what that looks like in person is if you have sticky notes and you say, hey, we're going to talk about this idea, this concept. So what I'd like to do is, let's just try to generate as many ideas as we can in the next 2 minutes. And you have people write. What this does is it allows some space for the introverts to get their thoughts together before one of the extroverts starts sucking up all the air in the room, right? So I think those really help. That is also something that you can do with online collaborative tools. Stuff like Idea Boards does that. Mural does that. Mural is a tool that we use to deliver our training, and it's great for that silent collaboration. So I think that's one of the tools. And then so that's a tools answer is to use sticky notes and silent collaboration. The other thing is to make sure that it's safe. And that's one of the ones that's a little bit harder. to do, but maybe that's where you have a one-on-one conversation with someone who you see is not contributing, and you just ask them, hey, I noticed that in the retrospective, like, you didn't have a lot to say. What's going on? And then you have to stop talking. Hold on, yeah, that was an on-purpose pause, and Shervin's like, I got to get to the next question. But that's what you have to do. I was just demonstrating. You stop talking, and you let that silence be there. Let them gather their thoughts. Okay, that's it.
The next question is from Dom. He likes to know, would it make sense to break up Team MPS into two questions? Likelihood to recommend working on this team and likelihood to work at this org.
I dig that. That's cool. There's I'm thinking about that. So in Scrum, I'm really focused as a Scrum Master at the team level. And so I feel like if there is an organizational, something pathological about the organization, it's probably going to affect the team. It would be interesting to see if someone said, oh yeah, this organization's awesome, but not this team. Bleh, this one's terrible. I'd be like, well, why don't we focus on fixing that, right? I want to focus on fixing the team. I dig that though, because yeah, I mean, I suppose that's something that could happen, but the main thing is, in a retrospective, we are focused on us as a team. And so if there's something that's nasty about the organization that's going on, I want us to deal with it for this team, right? Because that team NPS, that the purpose of that question is really to get at the hearts of the people who are on the team. Do you love working here? If not, why not? Let's fix that.
That's a real pause, right? I'm ready for the last one. The last question. So the last question might involve you interacting a little bit after the session with somebody. But Mark's asking, Blake, do you collect all of these metrics in a spreadsheet and trend them? If so, do you have some examples that you could show? He'd love to see them in real life.
Yeah, I am like the worst at doing stuff like that. Let me see, the one that I for sure, like, I picture in my head, the one that I had to collect as kind of a spreadsheety thing was the how was work today. But the way that I did it was just a physical. It was in a spreadsheet form, but it was physical, and so I go post it up in the Scrum room, and then I'd have people use a Sharpie, and then I would keep them and I'd file them. But I haven't really. I don't do a really great job of creating reports or like minding historical data very well. It's something that you could do. So the follow-up question, which is, could you share it? Probably not, since I don't have it. But I think it's a good idea, and if it would help you to do it, you should.
That's the last question.
All right. Hey, I think we did pretty good on time. What do you think?
We have 0 seconds to spare, but yeah, we did a great job.
All right.
You're right.
Thanks, everybody. I will say this, I am super, super grateful that we got to do this, and I love that me and Shervin got to do this together. Please connect with me and go check out Improving. Improving is an awesome place to work. If you haven't considered it, you should.
Thank you all for attending today's virtual Lunch and Learn. And Blake, thank you for sharing exploring Scrum team performance. Improving values continuous improvement, and your feedback helps drive that. Please take a moment to complete a short survey for this session. The recording of the session will be available the next business day. To view the recording, locate the session from Improving's virtual events page. And while you're at the virtual events page, be sure to register for future Lunch and Learn sessions. We have some great talks coming up on business intelligence, test automation, architecture, and a special session presented by Code Authority about Code Launch 8, an awesome event to help technology startups reach the seed funding stage through better technology development.